Evening, neighbor. Evening. Is your boy Trini Trent. Here this now. Today I want to have a bit of a different type of conversation with you. Well, not that different if you're rolling with me for quite some time. We've had some similar discussions before. But today I want to really bring it into context based on something that happened fairly recently here in Trinidad and Tobago where I live. And it's going to require me to exercise a bit of vulnerability and really surrender to the process. Folks, let's talk about homophobia in music. Recently, I was working from home here in Trinidad, doing the people work. And I was listening to the radio and really enjoying the vibes. When suddenly things took a bit of a wrong turn. And I got a very harsh reminder of exactly where I am in the world. A DJ came on air and he played an entire playlist, as in allocated an entire segment of his show, his time on the airwaves, to playing music that promoted violence toward gay people, effeminate men, or as he put it, otherwise unacceptable men. And in that moment, as I heard the music across the airwaves and I was hearing all of the songs come on one after the other, I felt disappointed, I felt dismayed, and in many ways, I even felt afraid. Growing up here in Trinidad and Tobago, I have experienced many different types of homophobia. Many different types. And I mean, it goes from the milder end, as if it could really be that mild, the milder end when we talk about microaggressions. Those moments where I simply was not included or invited into certain masculine spaces or just any space because of the way I express myself, the pitch of my voice, the tone of my voice, how I talk with my hands. Some people like to look at me during the daytime when I film. People say they could see my hands moving in the picture over there. The way I am so animated, it has cost me in many ways because some people simply do not want to have me in their space, in their presence. I spoke about this recently in a video where I talked about, trying to get into the media industry here in Trinidad and Tobago and how I was denied opportunities and in many ways was told to give up that dream because of the way I speak. And that unless I'm willing to change how I express myself, I will never make it far in media. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have the more aggressive types of homophobia. And that's where we talk about the verbal and physical assaults. Growing up, I experienced many different types of physical violence as a child and as a teenager. When I say physical violence, I mean, in some cases, very extreme in public. And it caused me a fair degree of trauma. And then even into my young adult years, and even as I got older, I experienced verbal types of assaults. I even had somebody as an adult, as I think this was 2012. It was not too long before I had migrated to go abroad. For those of you who have been following me since the channel start, I remembered I had a grown man come up into my face and tell me that he was going to kill me. Not because he knew anything about my personal or private life, but simply he didn't like the way I spoke. And that he wanted to put two in me, as he said. And by two, he meant bullets. And it really put me in a space of shock and fear. Now, I stood up for myself, but on some level, I was very afraid. And as I hear these songs playing through the playlist, as I sat down and I listened to the songs before I just got up and turned the radio off completely, because after about 10 minutes of realizing, wait, no, this is a serious playlist that he's playing. When I heard the DJ playing those records, I was taken back to those moments of trauma. And I was taken back to those moments of fear when I felt absolutely nothing but despair and worry for my own life. Now, for the purpose of this conversation, it's important that we understand that homophobia does not just affect gay or same-gender loving men. Homophobia affects all men. Homophobia affects all men. I'm going to say it again. Homophobia affects all men. It's about those of us who don't live up to or match the societal and cultural benchmarks of masculinity. And when I talk about these benchmarks, I'm talking about the gender ideals and the gender norms. Gender ideals refer to how men should be, and gender norms refers to how men should behave. In this case, heteronormative behavior, the behavior that defines you as a heterosexual man. And the issue of homophobia is further compounded when we include the dynamic of race. When we add that other intersectional layer of identity. You see, for those of us of African descent, we are expected to express ourselves and behave in very hyper-masculine ways. We are supposed to present ourselves in very hyper-masculine ways. We are supposed to live up to these hyper-masculine, extreme representations of masculinity. So, we're supposed to have the deepest voice, the most aggressive demeanor, the biggest car, the biggest watch, tattoos, beard, muscles, broad back, strong body. You're supposed to carry yourself in a very aggressive way, not just assertive, but bold and aggressive. You're supposed to be the strongest voice in the room, the greatest presence at the table. That is how we are expected to be. And then when you think about hypersexuality, it adds another layer to that, because we are supposed to express ourselves in the way that we were taught through the experience of chattel enslavement. You're supposed to act in these very hypersexual ways. And in the case of the conversation, in the context of homophobia, you're supposed to do that with women. You are supposed to be aggressively in the pursuit of women, where you don't just have one woman, but you have more than one. You could settle down with one when you get old and decrepit. But when you're young and you're good looking and you're fit, you're supposed to have multiple women. That's the ideology and the way of thinking that informs the behavior that tells us that a man cheating on his girlfriend is normal. That type of thinking that has us acting like studs in the field, like an ox going from female cow to female cow to female cow, whoever the oxes have sex with. Well, it's called a female ox. I ain't even sure. But you're going from cow to cow to cow. You're going from heifer to heifer to heifer, hopping on one to the other, because your role is to impregnate and to spread your seed, your royal oats. And what homophobia does is that it polices the lines that are drawn around the box of masculinity. And it upholds many of these different systems that are in place to maintain masculinity or socially accepted masculinity. So homophobia looks to see who's not living up to the benchmarks of the gender ideals, or who's not living up or performing those gender normative behaviors, those behaviors that are aligned with accepted masculinity in a society. And what it does is that anybody who doesn't live up to that is punished. Any behavior that is not in line with what has been outlined as acceptable behavior is used as a basis for victimization and marginalization. And you are labeled as the other. We touched on this when I spoke about my favorite Christmas song, Neighbor Bring Out the Ham. You are labeled as the other. You are labeled as someone who does not belong in this society, within that cultural context, and you are segregated, and then sometimes you are abused and violated until you fall in line. But the thing about homophobia is that it has to be continuously massaged into the psyche of a society. It has to first be normalized, which it has been here in Trinidad and Tobago and many parts of the world. It has to be first institutionalized, seen as normal, as part of the family unit, as part of your schooling, as part of your general society, even through religion. And then it has to be continuously reinforced, repeatedly beaten into the minds of people so that we can uphold and continue to carry out the tenets of homophobia. And you see, when you think about a society on a wider level, something like this can only be accepted if it has spread through the minds of everybody involved in the system. And that explains in many ways why that DJ felt so empowered to get on the air and to play this playlist of songs that were all about attacking, killing, marginalizing, segregating, and removing people who he did not consider to be acceptable men. He felt empowered to do this because there's no consequence for his behavior. He felt empowered in that moment to sit there and use important airtime and ad time and even receive calls from people who were bigging him up and telling him he was doing the right thing because there was no consequence for his behavior. He didn't feel like he was going to lose his job or his livelihood. He felt like this was normal. And unfortunately, to be quite honest, it's not the first time I've heard it. Actually, not even the first time I've heard it in 2020, going into 2021. I heard it throughout the year, through my many times sitting down here doing the people work, working from home in my little pajama pants. Don't tell my boss that. In my little pajama pants, I am hearing on the radio these playlists that are in rotation. I've actually heard this exact same playlist over and over again. That's to tell you the thing. They have the homophobia pre-program in the little Apple playlist. And they just put it on and let go. And then they take a few calls and then they go to a break. Here now. Fussy thing program into the system. The thing about music is that it is a very powerful vehicle. A vehicle for sharing ideas, messages, thoughts, and ideologies. And what this DJ did, the reason his actions by putting on this playlist and all the other people who did the same, the reason what he did is so dangerous is because he used this vehicle to spread a message of hate and violence. Not just against a group of people, a specific group of people, but he did it toward an entire section of society. And he did it towards so many people, he probably didn't even know he was making a victim of the same music that he was playing. He didn't even know he could be making himself a victim. Because who's to say that he wouldn't be walking down the street one day and he may not be walking in a way that somebody thinks is acceptable and they attack him. And that same person may be a fan of his music on the radio, of the playlist that he played, and don't even know that they're attacking their favorite DJ because he's not living up to that standard of masculinity. I don't remember all of the different songs that were on the playlist, but I took note of some. One was Frenzy by Sanchez. Now, this song is very dangerous. It is particularly insidious and sinister because when you hear this song, it sounds like a very upbeat, melodic, fun type of reggae song, party vibes. But when you actually listen to the lyrics, it's actually a very homophobic song. It's a song that basically gives us a perfect example of how, through homophobia, the other is defined and marginalized. Because in this record, he's talking about this is the type of thing that he does as a man. This is what is acceptable. This is what all men should do. And anybody who does not live up to this, as in, you don't surround yourself with women and you don't act a certain way or party a certain way. If you don't behave like this, then you can't sit amongst the men. You need to be removed. And anybody who's an ally to someone who acts like that, even if you're just a friend of someone like that, then you need to be segregated as well. And another song I heard was Buju Banton, Boom Bye Bye, which is like the ultimate homophobic anthem here in the Caribbean. Because that song blatantly clearly describes and depicts violent and graphic murder of gay people and anybody who is suspected of such. And then, of course, we have T.O.K.'s Chichi Man, which was also on the list. And that song, if you've ever seen the video for that song, is actually quite frightening. And you know what I realized on that playlist, and even as I'm saying it here, many of the records that were on that playlist, almost all of them were from Jamaica, dancehall and reggae music. And that's because of the depictions of homophobia in Jamaican culture tend to be very aggressive and very direct. And we don't have much of that here in Trinidad culture. Our soca and calypso music isn't that direct. We tend to talk in innuendo, and our music tends to not focus on such topics. But you see, I think he was able to rely on those music because it really got his point across. And that goes to show the power of music. He was really using those songs to drive his ideology and his point home. So where do we go from here? What's the point of all of this? Why I come to Hamburg here? I think what we need, and I think what we'll benefit from, all of us, in any society, is to have a wider conversation of gender-based violence. You know, right now it's trending in Trinidad and Tobago and different parts of the Caribbean and the world. You know, we're talking about the violence against women and children and the elderly. And I think that's so important and I love it. Not the violence. I love the conversation about changing it and resolving it and getting to the root of it. But we also need to include in that the violence that is homophobia. Because homophobia affects all men. And if you really think about it, when you think about the impact that homophobia has on people who either go out and commit violent crimes or become victims of those crimes, or people who are so afraid of carrying themselves as they truly are, that they live in this under this constant patriarchal male gaze, where they're constantly code switching and checking every little behavior and monitoring themselves so rigidly because they are afraid to fall victim of this. Can you think of the psychological impact that has on a human being? Or those of us who've experienced the physical and verbal trauma, can you think about the impact that has on your mind, on your being, on your emotional state? There are people who are walking around with years and years of emotional trauma and physical scars. And we have to come to a point where we have a healing, we have a reckoning for this. And we have to find a way to uproot this because it is destroying our societies and preventing us from moving forward. I mean, I just think about myself. And I think about the many other people like me who have been abused, and sit down and think about, where do we go from here? Where do we fit in the whole world of things? Just because I talk a certain way, or I walk a certain way, or I sing a certain way, does that mean that I deserve to be abused and violated and killed? Does that mean that I don't belong? These are questions that I ask myself all the time. And I am grateful to still be here, because there are many people like me who have suffered. And they are not here because they are either killed or they took their own lives out of pure fear. Thank you for watching this episode of Trini Trent TV. It's a different type of conversation. There's a lot more I would like to say. I would like to take it much further, but I think I need to pace myself and also think of different mediums in which I can have this conversation, or which I could have this conversation and share my ideas with you all, because we have some work to do, folks. We have some work to do. My question to you is, have you witnessed this in your own society? If you're not in Trinidad or anywhere in the Caribbean, or even if you are here, what have you witnessed regarding this? Is it normal? Is it acceptable where you are? And what can be done to change it? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you again for watching. Anyway, all you, I have work in the morning. Yeah, see people work. Let me go. Later.